everybody. In this podcast episode today, we warmly welcome Professor Helen Holmes from the School of Modern Languages and Applied Linguistics here at the University of Limerick. Helen is an active member of the Centre for Applied Language Studies, having previously served as director of the centre. In addition, she served as Dean of the Faculty of AHSS and has very recently completed this no doubt challenging but highly rewarding role. Helen has a wide range of research and teaching interests under the broad umbrella of sociolinguistics. So we're all eager, Helen, today to hear more about your research interests in this podcast. So let us begin with the first question, Helen. And can you tell all the postgraduate researchers listening to this podcast today a little bit about your research area of expertise?
Okay, thanks very much, Michelle. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to take part in the podcast. It's a really great series and I'm delighted to be included. So thank you. So my area is sociolinguistics, and that's, at its most basic, it's an interest in language and society, and I'm very interested in how language works in society and how people use and abuse language in society. I'm particularly interested in how people use language as an instrument of control in society. So one area I work on a lot is language policy, and I suppose on the surface, language policy is about managing languages. But for me, that's only the start of it, really. Why do we manage language in society? What else are we trying to manage? And usually there's some issue around power, resources, access going on, controlling people, controlling resources, something like that. So that's what gets me interested, and I'm very interested in that whole area. Linked to that, I'm also interested in minority languages. I'm interested in multilingualism, more at a societal level, I guess, than at an individual level. So I'm interested in it in areas like media. I've done a lot of work on advertising and multilingualism, and I'm also interested again in the kind of the economic dimension, or even I suppose the political economy of language. So what is, in whose interests is it to use languages like this, or to control languages like this, or to maintain languages like this, and what is being achieved, and what are the wider outcomes. And I suppose inevitably at the moment, given those interests, I'm very focused on language and technology as well, and I've been doing quite a bit of work on that. So I hope you can see the connection between all of that, but that's the sort of broad area I'm interested in.
A wide scope in that, even said, from moving from language policy and even now to the current trends of language policy, and even looking at technology and how that relates. So it's really interesting. It's fascinating how broad your research has, I suppose, achieved over these years and throughout your career, Helen. And what I want to go back is way back to the beginning. What really first attracted you to your academic discipline, or where did this research area stem from?
I suppose I've had an untypical start in the sense that I actually did business studies. So I started out doing business studies and languages, and I did German, and I enjoyed the business studies, but I really enjoyed the German, and I loved German, and it was my strongest subject, and I really wanted to teach, and I saw what the teachers did in university, and I thought I want to do that. So I suppose I started really from wanting to teach, and then people were telling me, well, you'll have to do research if you want to teach, and so I suppose I had quite an instrumental approach, which sounds terrible, but I wanted to do this job, and that. And people are saying, well, if you want to do the job, you need to do research. And at that point in time, and I think this was maybe a mistake that I made, I did get some advice to go and do an MA in applied linguistics or in linguistics, because I didn't really have a strong linguistics background, obviously having done the degree that I did. But a scholarship opportunity came up, and I took it. So and that was in the UK, in Birmingham. So I took advantage of that and I got it. But I suppose I had to do a lot of catch-up work myself. Now, it can be done, but I suppose to have taken the year to do the MA would have probably helped, I think, at that point in time. And the area I picked, I suppose I had specialized in marketing in my business degree, and I was interested in that. So that's my interest in kind of advertising, media, all of that sort of comes from there. And I had also spent some time working on the East-West German border just before the Berlin Wall came down. And so I found that that whole situation fascinating. So I ended up doing my PhD on advertising as a new discourse in East Germany following the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it kind of brought all of my interests together.
Together, yeah.
And then I suppose at that point in time as well, in linguistics, I suppose a very interesting thing that was happening, I mean, it seems old hat now, but was the emergence of CDA, of critical discourse analysis. And I remember going to a BAL, British Association for Applied Linguistics conference as a postgrad and hearing Norman Fairclough give a talk about it. And I thought, oh my God, this is amazing, you know. And I went back to my supervisor, who was a very traditional in many ways. I mean, he was a literature scholar. Who had studied in Oxford, but he was also interested in language and business. He had done a lot of work on language and exports. And I said, this is an amazing theory. And have you come across this? And he was like, well, off you go, you know, if you want to look at that. So that did influence me a lot, I think, because at the time that I was kind of acquiring these skills and really soaking up a lot of things, I came across CDA. And I suppose that would be a piece of advice I'd have for postgrads, is to be very open. Go to as many things as you can, and you'll get inspiration from areas you might not think of, you know. So
really great.
That's sort of how I came across my niche, I suppose.
You know, and wasn't it fantastic that you won this scholarship, and you know, the doors that opened up in terms of opportunities for you, and how everything came together as you talked in your experience. There, you couldn't have planned it.
Timing and luck, you know, have a lot to do with these things as well. So
Helen, I suppose, thinking back to that time, as you mentioned there that as a postgraduate student you went to conferences and all the rest, and you had a great role model as well. You know, in terms of role models, if we look at this concept in itself, is there anybody that stands out to you as being a role model back when you were doing your PhD or during that time that might have had a great impact on you?
Yeah, it's interesting, this discussion about role models, because at that point in time, and this memory came back to me recently because I was at a conference and I was asked to think of an example from this context. Like, everybody in that department was, well, all the professors were men. They were all British men who had gone to a certain type of education, you know, who'd been through sort of public schools, Oxbridge, that sort of thing, or kind of scholarship system. So they're very different to me, I would say, and that. So I did have a great mentor in the form of Sue Wright, who's very well known in language policy. But Sue was really struggling to get up that career path. She had been a secondary teacher for a long time, and she'd come into research just because she was genuinely interested. She was working with a lot of, in very kind of mixed sixth form college, and she wanted to investigate this idea of whether getting literacy in your mother tongue before literacy in, say, English as an academic language would be a good idea. So she came with a real world problem that she wanted to investigate, and her research grew from there. And so for me, she was always a great role model. And and also when I came to Limerick, I found Angela Chambers, who had the chair in applied languages before me, a great role model, a really generous colleague, a really, you know, always making time for people, always kind of really, you know, thinking about the big picture, thinking about everybody, and really interested in mentoring and bringing people on and giving great advice. So these would be the people I would probably have tried to model myself on, or would have seen the really great characteristics there. But some of the really big professors in the department, I had very little in common with them, and they had very little in common with me. So I didn't really model myself around them. And I've been very convinced all along that we need different models of leadership in universities. And I think a lot of what's played out over the last 20 years has really shown us that.
Helen, you really touched on some fascinating points there, particularly I think from a female perspective, right? And the role models that you mentioned there were your colleagues, you were closely beside them, and they were all female, which is really interesting to anyone listening to this podcast today.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting. Like I probably shouldn't say this, but my supervisor, he's a very nice man and everything like that. But I used to bring his books back to the library for him. I used to collect his dry cleaning for him. I used to do his teaching when he wasn't around. You know, it was just expected. It was a completely different model of kind of, you know, he was sort of up there and I was down there, and and I didn't like that, and I didn't want to replicate that at all. You know, it was quite alien to me. So
That's really interesting. I think that students really listening to this today will just find that fascinating. And that leads very nicely on to the next question, is your role as a female and, in academia. How has you, being a female, impacted your career? I know that we could touch on positives or negatives here, but especially because you've held so many managerial positions throughout your career, but has being a female had more positive or negative impact? Or could you draw on both here?
Yeah, I think I would say positive and negative. I've always enjoyed, so I suppose there's three aspects to academic work. There's the administrative aspect, the teaching aspect, and the research aspect. And I would have got into it first of all for teaching, and then kind of discovered sort of by accident my love for research, my interest in research. But I've always enjoyed the sort of management side of it as well, and the administrative side. And I think you can learn a lot from that, and it's important. It's important to take on your roles and to play your part in all of that. And I suppose within an academic career, it's very important, I suppose, to see as well. And I guess this affects male colleagues too, but it certainly affects female colleagues. There will be highs and lows. There will be troughs and there will be peaks, and there will be a lot of troughs, So it's, I think particularly say, when you have children, that's an obvious time when you just need to get through a few years. I mean, some people do this very well and manage it very well, but sometimes you're just kind of you're just sort of doing what you need to do for your job, and then but it will come right after a few years. Or sometimes women tend to take on caring roles, so you might be involved in caring for older parents or something like that. So it might not just be a childcare thing, it might be other things, and then the career sorts, it can sort of set up. But I think the more support we can give people with that. So I'm a big supporter of the Returning Academic Carers Grant. I think that's been a great thing for people to get their research kick-started. I think it's a little bit unfortunate that it has to happen straight after the maternity leave, because I think sometimes that might be the time when you really can't focus on research and you just want to get practical things like teaching and admin done. And it might be good if that could be taken up at a later point in time. But yeah, I mean, the positive is for me bringing I suppose a feminizing touch to leadership is important. I think for a long time the thinking was, okay, we mentor women and we mentor minorities and people who don't quite fit into these leadership roles, and we make them fit into them. And I disagree with that, and I've probably been guilty of that in the mentoring that I've done. And I very much feel, actually, no, it's the other way around, that when you come into these roles, you really have a duty to try to change them, and to not just be, to take on the role as it is, but to actually try and change it and try to challenge some of the existing stereotypes. And I think women are in a position to do this, and probably controversially, I would say women have a duty to do this. I think we have an affinity with groups. We fought for our rights, and it's important that we don't leave other groups behind and don't leave other women behind. And I read Kamala Harris's autobiography, and she says in it that her mother used to always say to her, "You might be the first, but you shouldn't be the last." And I think that's very important. So not to take on this pretend image of what a leader should be based on really bad role models and stereotypes that we have, and to reshape that. I think that's really important.
And obviously, Helen, what you talk about there, this comes up time and time again. Now we have diversity inclusion at the forefront, even in our strategies. And I see recently the eMERGE group in UL really focuses on this, and you touched on there as well, work-life balance, and especially being a mother or having other responsibilities as a PhD researcher or as an academic. There are so many challenges that this brings. But now, Helen, looking back at your younger self, what advice would you give for that work-life balance, or to any researcher listening today?
Yeah.
What was your kind of, way how you deal with this in terms of work-life balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think at certain points in time, work will take up more of your life, and if you're happy with that, I think that's okay. And I think for many people, research can be a passion and it can be something. But on the other hand, I've always felt that research is a job, and it's not a hobby, and it shouldn't be a hobby, and it shouldn't have to take up all of your free time. So it should be possible to do do the research that you need to do within the working year. Now that's a huge challenge, and people will say, oh, no way, I'll never get that done. But I think as an institution, we have to try to find ways to do that, and to work out ways to do that. So I have always tried to do that, and I suppose only really when I'm under extreme pressure do I work at weekends or in the evenings. Now people probably shoot me when they hear that, but I really have tried to keep to that, and to kind of keep that balance, or keep some perspective on it. I think I also feel that it's hard to give advice actually to younger colleagues at the moment, because the scene has changed so much since I was a postgrad. And I mean, I'm even feeling old now talking to you here, because, you know, I finished my PhD. There were two of us in German doing PhDs in Aston, where I was, and we both finished our PhDs. We were both offered basically full-time multi-annual lectureships. I had no publications. I'd given one or two conference papers, and so very, very different. And you know, it was kind of, oh, you'll get a job, and you got a job. I mean, that's completely changed. That's really changed. So it's very hard to advise people, and it sounds very easy for me to say these things. You know, have faith in yourself; it will work out. You know, because I think that the career situation has changed so much for people. I feel really sorry for people. I mean, when I was dean, we would get applications in for lecturer below the bar posts or teaching assistant posts, you know, almost 100 for some of them, you know, 80, 90 in some subjects, highly qualified, lots of publications. So, you know, there's a real challenge there, and I don't think the number of jobs have really grown with the number of people who are qualifying as PhD students. So, you know, I was very lucky at the time that I qualified, you know.
And no doubt, Helen, as well, COVID-19 is going to have an impact on this as well. But I suppose PhD students listening today, they have a lot of takeaway points from this talk. And I suppose at the end of this, to kind of finish up today, is what advice would you give, Helen, to PhD researchers on their research journey right now? They put at the beginning, the mid, the end, from all different faculties. But what advice would you kind of give to them going away from this podcast today?
Yeah, I really think being open to opportunities and to new things. So I always remember that when I talked about Sue Wright, but how I got to know Sue was she came to our office. We were 4 PhD students working together, and she came into the office and she had a proposal, and she actually gave it to a friend of mine who was researching another area, because they had a subject in common, and she was starting a journal, she was editing a journal, she needed someone to be the editorial assistant, and my friend said, oh, I don't know about this, you know, it was a tiny amount of money. She said, I don't think I'll do this. I don't think this is a good opportunity, you know. And then I said, well, would you mind if I said it? And I wasn't really in that area because I hadn't really sort of settled on my PhD topic yet, and that. And then I went to Sue and I said, could I do this? And she said, well, if you want to. And I thought, yeah, great, I can earn the money, I can get the experience. And that's one of the best things I ever did, because I discovered all sorts of, that's how I met people like Nick Coupland, all that through this journal. And it wasn't an obvious opportunity for me. And in some ways I just sort of wanted some work. I've always liked working, being busy. So I would just say, I suppose, be open to opportunities, be nice, be kind. You know, I think, you know, no more than social media, peer review is blind. Don't do unto others what's been done unto you. If you get an unkind review, take it on board, but don't do that kind of thing. Don't continue on those kind of practices. They're not good practices. Make friends. You'll make great academic friends. Keep them. Networks. All of that sort of thing is really important, that the networking aspect and the making friends, and often those things can be opportunities that are outside of your immediate area, and it might seem as if it's haphazard, but if you keep your narrative coherent, you know kind of what connects everything. And I suppose the final thing is, don't despair. I've had many moments of despair. I really have. Had a lot of times giving up, feeling like giving up.
Very honest.
No, it is. And it can be like that. I would say be honest about that. Ask for help. Ask for advice. And realize you will get through this, and the inspiration will come back, or focus on something very practical, and that will get you through. And then you can start to think about the more abstract things, the harder things, like, you know, if you get a knock, take time,
Yes.
recover from it, and keep going. You know, that's the kind of and I never had a grand plan. I'll just say that to you as well.
No.
I never had a vision. I just sort of went with my instinct and with opportunities that came along. And, you know, so there's a lot to be said for that, I think, as well.
Oh, it's fantastic, Helen. Really, the real honest kind of practical experience that you've given to us today, really, it says a lot. And I think everybody can, you know, there'd be key takeaway points from this talk today. We really appreciate your time. We congratulate you having completed your deanship at the Faculty of AHSS, and we wish you luck on your future endeavours. So thank you very
Thanks.
much, Helen Kelly.
Thanks a million. Thanks so much, Michelle, and thank you for the talk. Thank you.
Thank you.